And I whoop. When last we left our intrepid heroes, you know, they were gonna hang out on the Isle. Dun, dun, dun. Here we go now. Here we go now. Here we go now. Chapter 10. The Isle. The Shed. Early in the morning, Jhee sought out the horticulturist. A few prospectives who had been standing about talking hurried back to work. Jhee paused to have a gander at Saheli's favorite spot. Her mixed company on the initial tour meant she had not been able to investigate it as thoroughly as she wanted. Jhee rested on the bench and cast about her. White flickering from the ajar shed door drew her attention. She moved closer. Sister Sarah slapped Jhee on the back. She gasped hard to get her wind back. None the worse for wear for your visit to Sister Souse, I see. Jhee felt a sharp pinch on her wrist. She found a bog gnat making a meal of her. She flicked its squished remains away. Indeed, your arrival was quite timely. I have standing orders with her assistants to call me if they're concerned. Try this. It's a mild analgesic. The horticulturist handed Jhee a tube of spike leaf ointment. Salva mentioned something about missing drugs. Not missing. Rationed. Besides, Sister Souse isn't licensed to prescribe. Even if she were, we have doubts about how many of the pharmaceuticals would reach the patients. The prime suspect in the matter was the good doctor herself. She may have been a good doctor once until her senses started to go. And the self-medication. We cut back her supplies after a few mishaps. She's still allowed to practice. Why? Same reason as she got assigned. Nepotism. We're currently waiting for a replacement. Almost 2 full years. Many doctors are moving inland. The Soothbringers have been offering free healing lessons. Penance, they say. They charge no fees to learn or for their services, though the healing does involve the new science. We're an order who eschews arcana. Most healers have incorporated at least some of their techniques into their work. It's getting harder to find doctors who don't in some way. To hear her tell it, she still does a brisk trade. Sister Zalba's favorite remedies use spirits of the alcoholic kind. In particular, she views our select blend as a cure-all. I suspect it's the only reason anyone still seeks her out for treatment. Most learn to come to me or the prioress. Now, I have an extensive selection of mood adjusters, medicines, and herbal remedies. Fill me in on the nature of the complaint, and I can narrow it down for you. For nightmares and trouble sleeping, I suggest Starrow's root, though it does vex the ability to cipher. For shakes and tremors, lilac acid tincture. Night flower for mania and midnight bloom for melancholy. While her herbalism and pharmacology were a little oxidized, Jhee found no quibble with any of those suggestions, unlike what the physician had recommended. Jhee might consult an expert, Murray, or bring her along on a return visit. Something scholarly, perhaps? A steady aid. I have several preparations for memory and focus, others which makes one more receptive to learning and creative and imaginative thinking. I think perhaps I should just stick to the items on my list. Your choice, if I may. Jhee handed Sister Sarah her list, who touched her chin and bobbed her head in approval. Lashotic remedies. Solid choices. Portable and easy to store. You'll want them pre-dried and ready for transport. We'll have to go into the apothecary stores. If it's not breaking any confidence, mind if I ask what you prescribed to Saheli? I'm no doctor, simply a gifted amateur. Verdale, where I'm from, was teeming with plant lives. A lot of it useful, a lot of it hostile. Mistake Brightshade for Blightshade, you'd regret it. The bog gnats continued to buzz around Jhee. She swatted them away. Am I clear on understanding that Saheli partook of Brightshade? Just so. It's one of those study aids I mentioned. It does have hallucinogenic properties, though, and is best not taken alone. Saheli took 2 seeds twice a week under my supervision for meditation purposes. We sometimes sought the four conjunctions together, which lie deep in barbarian lands. All save one have fallen into their hands. The only way to visit them is via the use of ecstatics to open the mind and commune with the makers through visions. Though she had begun to develop a tolerance to it. Is that why you went up the spire to check on her? And didn't want her to go to the infirmary? Sister Sarah took up a glass pipe and packed dried leaves into it. She rubbed her fingers together, which produced just enough flame to heat it. She took a deep drag and held it before releasing a voluminous cloud of smoke. No one in their true mind wants to go to our infirmary. Saheli humored Zalver to make her feel useful. However, she also knew her, the prioress, and Elkanah to be tiresomely orthodox and inflexible. When I glanced over and found her gone, a closer look revealed her on the floor. You are right. I didn't. I did rush to the tower to search for any trace of Seed of Enlightenment, so they wouldn't know. Meanwhile, the cat licked everything in sight, including her spilled drink. It escaped when I opened the door. Sarah offered the pipe to Jhee. Jhee refused. The horticulturist's pungent scent and smell of smudging stick made more sense now. I didn't realize Drakists were allowed to partake. They're not. I'm pluralist. One of the few left here. The remnants of my order merged with the Drakists when our monastery was overrun. I hope I didn't overstep offering you the wine. Not as such. Demand has spiked, but I'm eager for more independent research on its healing properties. I admire anyone who'd take a pleasure cruise on these waters. Sister Sarah leaned over and whispered to Jhee, must make for passionate times with the adrenaline and fear. Your full marriage cohort instates you to be a woman of appetite. One spouse, no doubt, deft in experience. Two whom you can groom and teach. Always mind the quiet ones. Jhee waved away more gnats. Sister Sarah looked unperturbed. I saw you grow lace root melons. May I make an addition to the list? Feel free. Unlike my colleague who is stingy with the fruits of her labor, I prefer to be generous. I consider mine a gift to all those who would ask. Would you have any of the candies? Another of our most profitable exports. I can't quite get enough of them myself. Here you are, added to your requisition writ. If you'd like some now, I'll give you some of mine. Jhee slapped her arm as another bogfly got her. Sister Sarah produced a candy dish from under the workbench, and they each had one. You were right about Sister Elkanah. She didn't let you anywhere near her precious relics. Once that humor shrew makes up her mind, that's it. You're better off. Archives, relics are about death. My domain is alive. I came across something interesting, though. Plans to turn this into a health resort or commercialize the vineyards and orchard? Sister Sarah coughed. The pipe slipped from her hands. She wrenched out she reached out but nearly dropped the pipe again. She bounced it a few times before she found a cool place to hold it. Sarah placed it on the workbench, then blew in her hands. Unmake me! Justicar, if you would be so kind as to pass me back that spike leaf ointment. Jhee handed Sister Sarah the tube. The ointment's scent was sharp and bitter. Piermo's burn cream had a similar smell. On second thought, though, I may take some bright shade. Like I said, a woman of appetite. I'll give you some from my own private stock. I appreciate your challenging of Elkana's perspective. Smaller tin next to the candies there. Sister Sarah indicated the tin under the workbench. While Jhee set about locating the tin, she examined container labels. No marked pesticides or substances which might be used to poison someone. I also learned something of the mist abyss. By the time Jhee rose, Sister Sarah had brought out a wave skimmer. I have to get going. The wave whips, which is up, and the weather's decent enough. We should go skimming sometimes. I know all the best spots. Wave skimming. That would be a hard pass. Suit yourself. The horticulturist hurried off with her skimmer. Jhee muttered an oath at the closed and locked shed. On a mission. Jhee sought Priamo out next. Blessed are the first makers, Abbess. How goes your investigation, Justicar? You visited quite a number of our facilities. I wanted to get a proper sense of the Abbey's arrangement. To grasp the design, you must first understand the system. The prioress was most helpful. A shame her duties prevent her from helping me today. Duties? The prioress asked for the day off today. I assume to assist you. Perhaps I misunderstood. Par for the course nowadays. Unfortunately, she has become increasingly erratic. Pity. When she served under me while I held the position, she was quite reliable. I think she was more affected by Saheli's death than she cares to admit. Oh, were they close? Hard to say, really. Saheli was a very hands-on abbess. She frequently counseled young men personally. She was very friendly, but not without secrets. Like most. Would it be possible for me to look at the treasury logs, or perhaps the inventories and manifests? Why look at those? Simply being thorough, a routine question came up, and I want to verify it. Those records are confidential. I might be able to answer any general questions. The mortician said you sell off anything valuable the clergy possess when they die. Generally, yes. The professed bequeath their belongings to the Abbey. The situation is more complicated for the prospectives. We generally give the family an opportunity to claim them, although, with the large number of refugees fleeing, most have no family to contact. Often, their belongings are sentimental. Anything that's not gets logged into the treasury, yes? Yes. You said Saheli's belongings were interred with her or donated to the archives. What about the prospectives who died? Were their valuables logged into the treasury? The prospectives? Valuables? Most are fisher folk or shepherds. They had nothing more than a few trinkets. While every bit does help, their possessions were meager. No large amounts of currency? Currency? No. Why would prospectives have that here? Why, indeed. Another curiosity came up during my investigation. I heard a strange term. The Mist Abbess? Does that name mean anything to you? A story to frighten young novices. There's a possibility I hesitate to entertain. The rumors of the Mist Abbess's return didn't happen until Saheli's appointment. Thank you, Abbess. With your permission, I'd like to continue my investigations. Of course. The prioress had lied to Jhee about her activities. She never logged the large sum of cash the mortician found into the treasury. She also kept the tallies from bed-check. The prioress's talk of ghosts could have been meant to scare Jhee away. Could she and Reagan have conspired in sending Jhee on a wisp chase? Jhee would keep an eye on her. Ask the servants. Ask the servants, did you say, Bax? Lead the way. They won't talk to you like that. With Kento's help, had found her more unadorned day robes. She weighed the ability of her official robe's authority and dignity to loosen tongues against blending in. For now, she removed the sashes and any insignia of rank. She left her head wrap in place. It'll do. After a few discreet inquiries, Jhee located the prioress by the storehouse. The prioress visited various provisioners and clothiers at the Abbey and eventually the docks. I miss good old grain bread. More and more of it's that rice powder nonsense, said one fishmonger. Tried sopping up stew with it. Falls apart. Turns the whole bowl into mushy garbage, said another. Don't let it sit too long or dry out. It gets sticky, like cement. Took 2 days to clean the bowl my youngest hid 'cause she didn't want to eat it. The trick is to substitute direct, Jhee said. Rice flour needs more yeast and starch. Coconut flour is very absorbent. Use less or put in more liquid. The fisherfolk glanced at her dubiously. The first mister likes to cook. They nodded sagely. That rightly made more sense to them than a Justicar who might know how to cook. Bax, show me where the leafmongers partake, if you would. Bax led her through the hallways down to the cooking chambers to a rear enclosure sheltered from the elements. I'm going to investigate the prioress. You keep following Reagan. An overhang ensured privacy from the clergy's prying eyes. It also made an excellent vantage from which to mind the receiving area and await her quarry. A muddy, well-worn path led the way with an occasional stubbed-out butt. A few lay brothers and sisters choked on smoke root. When she entered, the nearest one dropped his and tried to stamp it out. Jhee held up a placating hand. I wondered if you might have an extra. The staff paused, dumbfounded. Then one stepped forward and handed Jhee an unlit, freshly trimmed root. Thank you. Jhee put the root between her teeth and used the young man's striker to light it. She dragged deep and tried not to cough. My cohort doesn't like me to partake, especially on the yacht. One of the co-fathers was a stickler, another staff member said. Drove our mother and the other father to token secret. When they had to get rid of theirs quickly, left a lot of half-smoked ones for me to clean up, which I did. The woman took a deep draw and raised her eyebrows. Jhee nodded. My grandam used to say smoke root kept evil spirits at bay. If only it was spirits what got them boys. Maybe even the abbess, the second staffer said. Just the other day, we had two perspectives lured to their deaths, a third staffer said. One got lured into the locked spire where he fell to his death. The door had been locked for some time, and there was still thick dust upon the ground. Now how could that have happened, save ghosts what led him there, I tell you. It weren't ghosts. It were the sea wisps. They led them poor men to their deaths. These young men about have them in sore frenzy, I bet you. They will take them under the sea to be their sea kings and spawn the next first fathers, I tell you. Sea was begging us back to the sea where we belong, the first staffer said. You don't really believe we were descended from maize, do you? I believe what Grandpa Bear and Grandma Mare told me. She said we were born in the sea and it ain't natural for us to be upon the land. That's what's wrong with them barbarians. They don't spend enough time in the waves, and it's caused them to become uncivilized, especially the sky singers. The sky singers? You don't believe those old legends, do you? I know we have the sky singers, the ground pounders, and them mixed fire children barbarians. That's what all I know. Well, I was out on the bluffs. I saw a pterosaur-like creature. One of the unmakers mentioned, I swear. Yet another staffer said. No, it had to be Chiroptis, or the Wave Witch. Only she had the power to summon winged creatures. First staffer leaned in. They say the blood cults are back, and it's the Mist Abbess which leads them. Fair. Best not to tarry with the unknown maker, or worse, the unmakers. Seawith lured that boy to his death, said the first staff. No, the second staffer said. It was ghosts. They must have chased him up the tower. How else could he have gotten in? And caved in the cellar on that other one, agreed the third staffer. Did you hear one waste away of fright? Jhee took a drag from her smoke root. Ghosts. I think I may have seen some myself when I was first arrived here. In the Zodiac courtyard. The second staffer nodded sagely. Their favorite spot. They say that's where the Mist Abbess liked to perform her blasphemous rituals. That's where one perspective died. Ill omen. It's the curse. The curse? Jhee asked. The curse of the unfettered dead. I swear I could hear them whispering through the walls. Ghosts of those who died here don't like all these new, crude men. Reminds them of what they once were before they were cut down by the barbarians. Makers make the shield, said the third staffer. Makers make the shield, Jhee and the others repeated. Had she seen an echo of some long ago blood cult dismemberment ritual? These three unfortunate. The system remembers, and those who tinkered with the forbidden were most apt to leave traces not easily forgotten. This place sounds more frightening every day, Jhee said. The abbess's death, these three unfortunates. You said Seawis misled the one who drowned. First staffer replied. Wisp lights on the heaths and the bluffs. Wisp lights have been seen for quite some time here. Boats used to be driven to their ruin on the breakers. Jhee closed her eyes tightly and shivered. They say it was the ghosts of the massacred here in the past. The wisp lights led many a poor body to their death here. The young spouse and children who never got a chance to grow and play now grow and play with the living to their detriment, said the last staffer. I've seen their lights out in the fields and bluffs myself, especially the wood, the first staffer said. The second staffer glanced back at the Abbey. Storm lights meant to drown out the false light of the dead. The third staffer stamped out a root. Best task the bilge workers near the harbor entrance. They found his body, caught in some lobster traps. The lights Jhee had seen from the first spire came to mind. Did you know anything about him? Was he particularly careless? Not more than most young men. He lacked the bluffs, though. He volunteered for any errands that took him out there. Another staffer grinned. Was it the errand location or the errand dispatcher? Jhee cocked an eyebrow. You suspected him of an affair with the staff? The first staffer shrugged and gave a little glance up to the main abbey. Fraternization? Jhee asked. Far be it from me to speak ill of the clergy, Justicar. But the horticulturist sure did need a lot of things from the seaport. Both deacons did, said the third staffer. More like the one wanted to know what the other was about. The prospective who got sick worked at the archives off and on. Sometimes the agropods, too. All staffers murmured agreement. What about the one crushed? Jhee asked. He bounced around here and there, restless sort. Not sure if this life was a good fit for him, but who am I to question the maker's plan? At last the prioress appeared. Jhee snuffed out her half-finished root. I have to get back before I'm missed. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. The second staffer waved the smudging stick over Jhee. It'll cover the smell, Justicar, to protect you from the wrath of witches, wisps, and disapproving spouses. Jhee gave a polite bow. Blight and bilge. The simmering sensation behind Jhee's eyes grew to boiling as she shadowed the prioress the rest of the day. The prioress paid the merchants and fishmongers with with shell currency. No doubt the money stolen from the unfortunate wretched prospective's corpse. She did her best not to let outrage overtake her and confront the woman. Finally, the prioress returned to the Abbey. Enough time remained before dinner to undertake a visit to the bilges. The weather lightened to trickles, and the clergy went to the, out to the fields to harvest what they could. Jhee conducted a personal walking tour of the island. Trailing the prioress had not presented the opportunity to appreciate its features. She strolled through the fields of grain. In images she had seen, they were 2 to 3 times this height. For every cleric working, she saw 1 or 2 refugees. Some clergy even milled about and watched as the refugees worked. She passed by the threshing shed and granary. What should have been floor-to-ceiling stacks of drying straw were barely half that. Refugees and clergy shoveled green, blighted plants into an incinerator. She picked up one of the stalks. Some of them contained purple, club-shaped growths. Blight seed. Some folk fished lobster trap and hauled in the creel nets. Others worked on a new drainage system for the bog, trying to reclaim wetlands for expansion and to host more people. The first maker's design guided Jhee's path to the bilges. The horrid, sweetly rank scent made the air a miasma. She covered her face so she did not gag. She wished she had brought a smudging stick with her. She found the bilge workers on a break. She offered one her half-used root. She leaned forward and sniffed it deeply, but waved it away. No sparks or open flames while down here, Justicar. Of course. Later then? Much appreciated, ma'am. But the smell gets in everything after long. What brings you down here, Justicar? Jhee put away the root as smoothly as she offered it. Ghost stories. You know about the prospective who drowned? The morning crew found him. Glad it weren't mine. At least they found all of him. Sometimes you only find part. Finger, toe, dentures. You see a lot when you muck out the storm drains and inspect bilges. The staff thinks ghosts or sea whiffs drove the young man off the bluffs or made him jump from the tower. Not sure how much ghosts had to do with it, begging the Justicar's pardon. They found him beyond the breakers, caught in some lobster traps, wedged between rocks. He couldn't get that far out, even from the Stormlight Tower. Jhee cringed. Rocks. Breakers. The current, perhaps? It's countercurrent. Only a few places he could have fallen to catch the right waters. The slope vineyard, the bridge across the bridge access way, or the lee of the isle. Most those is jagged rocks. Nothing can walk there but sheep and the surest of goats. He would have had to have been a ghost or a wisp himself to survive walking about there. He didn't survive, did he? No, ma'am. Suppose not. Blessed be the makers. The worker locked her hands together. Jhee did likewise. Blessed be the first makers. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Ghosts. The beach. Jhee awoke crammed between Kanto and Murray with the latter's arm flung over her face. She extricated herself as peaceably as she could. Her day robes and traveling robes had gone missing. She dug through the luggage around the room for anything resembling a simple wrap. The only other clothes of hers she turned up were the formal ones. She checked the dryness of her evening robes, which hung near the fire. They were still wet. Beside them, the robes Kanto had made had been cleaned and were dry as dust. She found a fresh poultice waiting neatly on the table beside a full, clear, adept teapot. She smiled and drew the teapot to heat the water. Shep joined her. As they drank the tea and perused the autopsy images, they sat hand in hand. He occasionally stroked her knuckles with his thumb. One prospective had a peculiar tattoo on his wrist. Each had the more traditional Jubilee tattoos, which indicated the celestial phases and alignments of their birthday. Evidence of a brand which resembled those of the medical protectorate caused her and Shep to tense. It wasn't one, thank the makers. Jhee brushed her fingers lightly over the fail-safe sigil implanted in her arm. They touched Eske before she left. Planting herself outside the prioress's cell bore Jhee the fruit she hoped. The prioress wandered to a side door in the shrine courtyard, one not on Jhee's map. No wonder she had tried to warn Jhee away from the place. It led to a little used delivery canal under the Abbey for cargo and fresh caught sea meat. The channel must also serve as an escape route or means to come and go from the Abbey unseen. A scruffy old man awaited on a skiff piled with boxes and crates. The prioress boarded and they pushed away from the landing. Jhee examined the canal area. Not another vessel nearby. The spit of landing ended at the canal entrance. From there, her options were wade or swim. In either case, she could not keep up with them. Psst! A sound came from the shadows deeper in the Abbey's bowels. The drip and splash of a pole in the water preceded a skiff piloted by Bax and Regan, gliding up to the landing. Jhee surmised Shep had Bax keeping an eye on her, regardless of whatever other tasks she set him. However, why, despite her charge, did Bax and Regan occupy this craft together? She had no time to ponder it now. She boarded, and they pushed off before the illumination from the skiff's lantern left sight. The haggard man looked over his shoulder often, but by the first maker's whim, a light mist rolled in. She drew it to conceal their pursuit. The fog had the power of the great storm in it. She realized after she had extended herself to it. It tugged and fought and tried to wrench itself from her grasp. With a last effort, she prevailed. She sat back and rested. Bax and Regan proved adept at navigating the shallows and masking their passage through the water. Her concealment was by no means perfect. They would be seen if anyone looked hard enough. Their journey came to an end when the skiff ahead came to a stop on an isle no more than a sandbar. Gruff folk met it. Bax and Regan broke off pursuit and put it in at a nearby inlet out of sight. Get out here. We'll stop the skiff and meet you up with you. We'll stow the skiff and meet up with you, Regan said. Jhee hopped out, flipped her robes inside out, and removed her insignia of rank. She remained overdressed anyway as she tried to blend with the crowd gathered to meet the skiff. These haggard folk were refugees. Burly refugees in clothes slightly less bedraggled than the rest helped the prioress unload the boat onto nearby sleds. Excited murmurs grew as refugees crowded the landing area. To Jee's astonishment, a suspicious handful of aid workers drew the sleds away from shore. They came to a stop at a nearby supply depot. The prioress clapped, and the refugees queued up. A table had been set up where workers already started a sorting line. The prioress opened crates and boxes to reveal food and clothing. She distributed them to the line of refugees. Every now and then, she pulled out a toy and presented it to a child. A sizable crowd remained once the prioress's provisions came to an end. She shook her head and rested her head in her hands. With a body-shaking sigh, the prioress went amongst the crowd, distributing the only goods she had in infinite supply, prayers and blessings. Even without supplies, a crowd pressed in on the woman, and she lost track of her. The refugees had noticed the fineness of Jhee's robes even inside out. Their lean, starved faces pleaded with her. Jhee gave what she had on her person: Merkergeld, medicines, her medicinal inhaler. She even parted with as much of her clothing as was decent, including Kanto's beautiful robe. She lost her poultice, too. The crowd parted enough for Jhee to glimpse the prioress again. In the confusion, the prioress disappeared once more. Jhee broke free of the crowd. She scanned the pathways through the tents and ramshackle huts. Most barely kept out the rain. Without her robes, she blended in better. She walked a few of the pathways between the tents. The sand was muddy and discolored. The air stank of urine and feces. A few aid workers distributed tarpaulins and beeswax to seal the plain cloth tents. A gap opened between one set of tents and another. She spotted the prioress surrounded by a group of young men and women. They went to a flat bit of shore tamped down by many feet. Another crowd already awaited. The prioress clapped, and they formed ranks. Men, women, and children proceeded to do meditations in motion. The meditations Jhee did to clear and center herself for ciphering. The prioress made no effort to separate the men or boys. The participants performed larger, more exaggerated gestures at full extension, like the articles suggested. However, a beach full of people was much, much larger than a recommended 5 to 6 person-sized class. Despite the admonition against ciphering and murky laws, the prioress proceeded to teach any and all ciphering, even men. The sequences and ciphers were a hodgepodge at best, a pastiche cobbled together from many journals and articles about male ciphering. Jhee had planned on using many of the same moves in the system she considered for Canto. This close, there was no mistaking the aid worker's pillarist garb. Another reason why the prioress would not want her activities known. The aid workers were soothbringers at least. The doombreakers had all but been eradicated. The soothbringers had folded themselves into various other orders such as Drakists and Beacons of Lost Sparks. Who else would be equipped, most equipped to teach ciphering indiscriminately?